you very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to see you all. And indeed, for some of you, it truly is around midnight. And normally, you know, the cliche I usually use is, don't worry about that word midnight. I don't talk until midnight. It just feels like it. And of course, I did do a session for you guys before, and I've been frantically trying to remember which stories you have already heard, because I could not bear to bore you by telling you the same story twice. So I think I found ones that that you haven't sat through before. Stop me if this is something you already know. When I was talking to possibly Darlene the other day, or somebody from the Nutters, there was mention of mosquitoes. And not surprisingly, there is a story that has a mosquito in it. And it goes like this. It is a story from the very, very long ago, from the very first days of our world. There were 5 brothers, and they never washed. And some of you will think, yep, brothers, blokes, some things never change. These 5 brothers lived together in a cave. It was damp, it was dank, it was musty, it was dusty, it was smelly. The 5 brothers were smelly. And one of the reasons it was just so nasty was they had no hot water to wash in. All right, they could go and get wet in the rain outside, but they didn't like doing that. And they had to eat raw food. And they had no hot water, and they could only have raw food because they had no fire. So they couldn't even get properly warm. In winter, they had to huddle together or sit with their backs to each other in a little horrible, unfriendly circle, shoulder to shoulder, with their backs to each other. And they couldn't see each other to talk to each other, and they were bad-tempered and bearded and horrible and manky and grubby and smelly and miserable. They knew where fire was. They knew what they could do with fire, but they didn't know how to get it, because fire was up there, that big fiery hot thing up in the sky, but they didn't know how to get the secret of fire from the old man who lives in the sun. It was all very complicated. One morning, one of the brothers said, I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to go and ask for the secret of fire. And he got a fallen branch from a tree, quite a big branch, and he gathered all his strength, this brother, and he started to run. This is my slow motion, high speed running. He ran fast, he ran faster, he ran the fastest he'd ever run in his life. And he took off, flying up into the air, zoomed up through the atmosphere, up through the stratosphere, all the way through space till he landed on the sun. And there was the old man who takes care of the sun. And the brother very politely said, please, down on earth, we are miserable, we are manky, we are cold, we are hungry. We need fire to make our lives better, please. Please, if you can't tell us the secret of the sun, which I know you're reluctant to do, could you at least light the end of my branch, and I'll take that back down to earth, and we can have some fire for a while. And because he asked so nicely, the old man who takes care of the sun agreed, and blindfolded the brother so that the brother couldn't see what was done, and went off and came back, and the brother was allowed to take his blindfold off, and the end of the branch was on fire. Brilliant. And so the brother started to run, and he ran fast, and he ran faster, and he ran faster again, and took off went flying through space, landed on Earth with a big burnt out branch. And the other brother said, well, that was worth trying. And one of them said, it was worth trying, but you're not thinking big enough. So the second brother picked up a huge, I mean, like a tree trunk, and he ran and he took off and he flew through space and he landed on the sun and very politely asked the old man who takes care of the sun to light the end of his tree trunk. And it was all right. And second brother, staggering a bit under the weight, took off from the sun with his tree trunk and soared back down through space and landed thump on Earth with a great big tree trunk sized burnt out branch. And the brother said, no, this is never going to work. This story is going to go on all day. And another brother said, it's all right. It's all right. We're just not clever enough. But the animals are cleverer than we are. Let's ask one of the creatures to help us. And at that moment, floating, drifting past the cave entrance was an owl on soft, silent wings. It landed, it peered into the cave mouth. And one of the brothers said, would you be willing to help us? We need someone to fly to the sun and bring back the secret of fire. Ooh, what a fun thing to do, said the owl. I can help you. Oh, that would be wonderful. And the owl got itself ready and spread its wings. And then just at the moment where it was ready to take off and fly, from across the way, opposite the cave mouth, it had and faster than a cat, the owl zoomed across to where that squeaking was coming from, because of course you and I know that more than anything else, better than adventure, an owl loves fresh mouse. And by the time the owl had finished hunting in among the long grasses in the bushes, it was so full of mouse, it couldn't even take off, let alone fly to the sun. And the brothers thought, this story's going to go on forever. We're going to get so bored. And then, slithering across the front of the cave came a snake. And the desperate brothers said, please, please, snake, please, will you help us? We need fire. We need to make our lives better. We need hot water. We need cooked food. Please, do you think you could get to the sun and bring us the secret of fire? And the snake said, certainly. I'd be delighted to help you. It sounds like a lot of fun. And it coiled itself up. And it had this extraordinary ability, which they don't have anymore. It was coiling itself up, and like a spring, it was going to boing up through the space to the sun. Well, I'm a storyteller, you have to believe me. But just at the moment where it was ready to boing, from across the way down by the river, the snake heard rivet, 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 rivet. And of course, there is nothing a snake likes better, even an adventurous snake. There is nothing a snake likes better than fresh frog. And so the snake went off to the river, and it forgot all about going to the sun. In a few minutes, the snake, you could see there was snake, frog bulge, snake, frog bulge, frog bulge, frog bulge. It was so full, it couldn't even coil up, let alone go anywhere. And the brothers sat in their miserable, damp, manky, smelly cave in absolute despair. And then they heard Mosquito arrived. Mosquito said, I hear you have a spot of bother. And the brothers said, yeah, we need fire from the sun. We need the secret of fire or something lit. Here, Mosquito, you're small, but you're pretty clever. Could you take this splinter? Could you fly to the sun and bring us back the secret of fire? Oh, I could do that. The brothers said, that's amazing. If you can bring us the secret of fire, we'll give you anything you want. And Mosquito said, I was hoping you'd say that. So they gave Mosquito this tiny splinter that was all Mosquito could carry, and Mosquito took off. Changing gear as he flew up, and Mosquito flew all the way to the sun and landed, and there was the old man who takes care of the sun, and Mosquito said, would you be so very kind as to light the end of this splinter so I can take it back down and bring fire to those poor, miserable, smelly brothers down on earth? The old man who takes care of the sun said, I can do that for you, but I don't want, and you're not allowed to see how fire is made. How do you see? I've never seen anything like you before. What sort of eyesight do you have? Mosquito said, I have very poor eyesight. I have compound eyes, very poor. Oh, well, that's all right. I can't, you don't need to blindfold yourself. I'll just put this basket over you. And the old man plonked a basket over Mosquito, who of course could see perfectly well out of the basket. And he watched as the old man went and got something that looked like a bow with a blunt arrow and a piece of soft wood. And those of you who've done survival, you know the whole business of putting that actually very slightly sharpened arrow into the soft wood, and then you saw the bow back and forth and you twizzle that thing in the soft wood, and then there's a little bit of smoke and a little bit of flame, and then you get some burnable stuff and you get it going. And then the old man took the splinter and very carefully lit the end of the splinter and came back to the basket, lifted it up and gave the splinter to Mosquito, who said, thank you so much. That's most kind of you. And Mosquito took off all the way down to earth and landed with a completely charred splinter. And the brother said, get to the end of the story. Mosquito said, don't worry, I have the secret of fire in here. He explained what the brothers needed to do, and the brothers went and got what they needed. And if you have done survival training, you'll know that actually it's a lot easier to say and to explain about the bow and the arrow and the soft wood and the burnable stuff. And actually you are going to be thoroughly blistered by the time you get anything like a flame starting, but it does work. And they got a fire, the first ever fire. They started and they fed it with twigs, and then they got bigger branches, and then they had a proper fire going just at the edge of the cave. And and they sat around and they warmed their hands, and the fleas were running off them, and the smoke blew over them, and more fleas and mites jumped off them, and then they started cooking. Oh, how they cooked. They might even have washed their hands in hot water before they got into the real cooking. And then they cooked some more, and they ate, and they cooked, and they ate, and they stuffed. And as they were sitting back, around the fire, all five of them, full of good, healthy, cooked food and feeling so good and warm and comfy, in came Mosquito, there you are. Come and join us. There's some food, if you'd like it. I don't eat cooked food. Oh, all right then. Well, there's some stuff left over. Help yourself. Ah, you don't understand. I don't eat food at all. I drink. I drink fresh blood, and you did promise me I could have anything I wanted in return for bringing you the secret of fire from the sun. And the brothers had to live up to their agreement. And we, as descendants of those first 5 brothers in the first days of the world, we are obliged to follow the agreement too. And that is why when you and I are sitting around the campfire, there's nothing we can do about and Mosquito continues to drink from us to this very day. Thank you very much. I haven't told that story for ages. It's one of those stories. I'm never sure if it's the kiddie story or a grown-up story, but having been plagued by enough mosquitoes over the years, I like that one. Okay, I'm just looking at a list. It's the usual thing. I write a list. Have they heard it before? And can I remember it? I've actually got to the point of my repertoire. There's some things I don't tell for months on end. Anyway, I'd like for the next story to give you a flavor of the area in which I live, which is the Cotswolds in England. And this is a story from that connects with the very early times when I was learning to be a storyteller. So I had found myself a storytelling evening class in a little town called Nailsworth. And to get to Nailsworth in the Stroud Valley, I had to drive across the top of a hill next to a village called Minchinhampton. Minchinhampton is a classic it's a classic Cotswold village with higgledy-piggledy Cotswold stone houses, honey-coloured with Cotswold slate roofs. And it's old and it's comfortable, and some of the roof lines are sagging and the little streets twist. And underneath the houses are the most extraordinary deep cellars that were used for smuggling in the 17th and 18th centuries, if not more recently. And next to Minchinhampton village is Minchinhampton Common. And to this very day, it is proper common land, which is to say it's not fenced. And farmers in that part of the world, they leave the cattle out. There were sheep at the time when I was driving around there. And sometimes a few people risk leaving their ponies out on the common. And there are 2 or 3 roads, and people do drive very carefully. There are old Iron Age earthworks. There's a Roman ditch. It is, in the daylight, it's beautiful. It's a wide open space. It's very unusual to see unfenced, wide open spaces in England. It's very high up, so you get these extraordinary long views across the Cotswold countryside. And driving across it by day, driving across it at sunset is gorgeous. My classes ended about 10:30 at night. And driving home across that big open top of the hill, on a clear night, it was as if the stars were coming right down to the ground. But because it was high up, it was often foggy, and the fog would wrap itself around the car. Sometimes the fog was so thick that even with my fog lights on, I could not continue, and I had to pull onto the side of the road and sit there and wait until it lifted a bit. And then this huge shape would loom up in the mist next to my car, and I would have half a heart attack and have to remind myself that the livestock were left out all day and all night on Minchinhampton Common. It was far too easy for someone with my imagination to imagine all sorts of things, including the ghost of the highwayman who used to prey on travellers crossing Minchinhampton Common. Now, they told me about Tom Long, the highwayman, in the pub at Minchinhampton, so of course it must be true. Tom Long was a very successful highwayman for a few years. And what he did was he would sit on his tall horse under the trees at the edge of the common, and he would wait until he heard the sound of coach wheels approaching him and horses' hooves crunching and clattering on the gravel track. And then he would load and cock his flintlock pistol. He'd pull the scarf up over his face. And at just the right moment, he would spur his horse down onto the track and rein in and stop the coach. Stand and deliver! Well, they all stopped, and then Tom would rob them. He'd take the cash. He'd take the bond documents. He'd take the jewels. He'd rip the lace from collars and cuffs, because in those times, lace was just as valuable as gold. And as I say, for a few years, Tom did well. And he was tall and not bad looking and broad-shouldered, and he could afford to dress well, and he laughed loud and easy and bought drinks for everybody. So he had friends, and he even had a wife who adored him. And they lived in a little cottage around the side of Minchinhampton, literally just off the common. And I've been shown the place. If you look at it from the outside, there is a plain Cotswold wall, and there's a roof, and there's nothing more to see than that. But there's a little courtyard if you go into it. And if in Tom's time, if you had gone in, you would have been astonished, because in an age where most ordinary people barely had a stool to sit on by the fire, and they slept on a straw mattress, well, Tom and his wife had a real dining table with chairs. They had a four-poster bed with thick brocade curtains to draw, to keep out the drafts and the rats. And Tom and his wife could eat meat at least once a week. Like the Lord and Lady of the Manor, they had smuggled French wine and brandy, of course, and other goodies. And it was all going so well. But Tom's reputation spread a little too far and a little too fast. And it was on a night of thick, swirling fog. Tom was sitting on his tall horse under the trees at the edge of the common. It had rained, and rainwater dripped down through the branches and trickled down the back of his neck. Tom was listening out for a particular prize that night, the Royal Mail coach. It would be laden with riches for him to plunder. And sure enough, at the hour he expected, there came the heavy rumbling of coach wheels. and the sound of 6 horses coming at speed towards him along the track. So he loaded and cocked his flintlock pistol and an extra one, and he pulled his scarf up over his face, and at just the right moment he spurred his horse down onto the track and wrenched it to a halt and levelled his pistol. "Stand and deliver!" As the first horses came towards him out of the mist, the driver was hauling on all the reins, and those horses came to a slewing, skidding, gravel scattering halt. And Tom just had a moment to think. That was easy. That was too easy. The moment after that, the tarpaulin cover across the top of the coach where they normally kept the luggage, that tarp was flung back, and there were 6 soldiers, 6 redcoats, leaping to their feet with pistols and a blunderbuss levelled. The 6 of them fired as one, and Tom's horse reared up and turned and bolted, and everyone could see the highwayman begin to topple from the saddle. But as he fell, his spurred boot heel caught in the stirrup iron, and the last that anyone saw of him, Tom Long was being dragged away along the ground beside his horse, away into the mists and darkness. And they say that that night, Mrs. Tom, sitting up, waiting in the cottage, waiting for her man to come back from work. She sat up later than she'd ever sat before. There were owls hooting across the Nailsworth Valley, and Minchinhampton church clock struck midnight, and 1 and 2. And then there was the clatter of hoofs in the yard outside. She ran out, and there was Tom's horse, reins trailing, saddle empty. She took the reins, and as she soothed the horse, she realized her hand was sticky. The horse's mane and neck and saddle were wet with blood. And Tom never came home that night, nor any other. The villagers of Minchinhampton, they say, were kind enough to Mrs. Tom. She was allowed to go on living in the cottage, but of course all the fine furniture and everything had to be sold. And they also say that to the end of her days, she sat up late each night, waiting for her man and keeping a rancid, moldy old pot of stew at the back of the stove. And they had been able to afford the fashionable new drink of the day. They had been drinking coffee, and she kept the very last 2 cupfuls of it in a little pot simmering on the hearth. And she did that every night to the end of her days. And I would remember that, sitting in the car on my own, held up, as it were, in the fog, those nights on Minchinhampton Common. And a few times I wound my window down to let in some fresh air. And I can tell you, I caught the smell, a smell drifting on that damp, chill air, a smell of old cooking, a smell of coffee kept warm far too long. And there were times, I am certain, I heard the sound of galloping hooves. And I was told that story in the pub in Minchinhampton. And the reason I could smell those smells, I think, was there was a rather awful pub on the other side of Minchinhampton Common, and you got the smell from their kitchen drifting across the open spaces there. But you can choose for yourself what the truth might be. And as I'm going through these stories, you can probably see where I'm slightly pausing to remember what comes next, and also sometimes just working my way through the story in a different way, especially if I haven't told it for a while. And this is the thing with live storytelling: it is not scripted. We really are free to reconstruct it, to riff on that theme. And it is why I call my work verbal jazz, because it is very like working with music to that extent. So now I'm looking at, oh, dare I tell this one? How are we doing? Oh my goodness me. All right, we're actually slightly running out of time. So I might do, it's all right, I'm just, come on, brain cells. Can you hear the grinding noises? All right, I'll do actually one of my favorite stories from a different time of year. Normally I work with the seasons, but some of you are at a different season anyway. And I'm trying to remember who I heard this story from. I can see him in my mind's eye. It'll come back to me. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll tell you later. But it's a story, well, the bones of the story I have from this other storyteller, and it connects with the time when I was first living on the edge of the Cotswolds, and I was doing what I've done for many years now, which was to rent a room on a farm, in a farmhouse, or renting a cottage on a farm. And so we can say that this story, again, you may have to choose where you find the truth of it. We can say that this story took place possibly a while before I moved to the farm. And it starts with old Joe, the farmer. Typical Cotswold farmer, twinkly blue eyes, and one of those anoraks with lots of stuffing coming out, and a permanent perfume of cows. It was nice enough. In fact, it was a lot of fun a lot of the time, and absolutely devoted to his farming, except he was also devoted to beer. Joe liked a drink. He liked to drink at lunchtime, and he liked to drink in the evening. And although he never, ever got nasty with his drink, in fact, when he'd had too much, he would just sort of nod off gently in a chair somewhere. But you can imagine that much booze was not doing his farming any good. And he had the kind of farm where there was black plastic everywhere, and you did not dare walk across the farmyard when there was a high wind blowing, because bits of roof would blow off and go bounding across the farmyard and the fields. And we were under strict instructions to stop indoors when the gales were blowing. Joe was lucky enough to have 3 intelligent sons, and they were so clever that they'd realized all 3 of them had to get out of farming and go and do something else for a living. The eldest son had become a vicar, doing very well. The middle son, also very bright, had become a vet, and he was a good vet. And all of you watching this, you know about vets, and you may agree with me that there are some vets you'd sooner trust your health to than some of the doctors we've encountered. At least I would have said that until 2018, but that's another story. The youngest son had gone all the way to London and used all his intelligence to train up and become a successful hotshot London solicitor, or lawyer, as some people call them. A vicar, a vet, a lawyer, doing very well and worried for their old dad. And they would say to him, Dad, you gotta give up the drink. Lay off the sauce, Dad. And Joe, with his blue eyes twinkling, he'd lift up his foaming tankard of beer and he'd say, well, when she gets so close to my nose, I can't help it. I lifts her up and down she goes. You can imagine that around Christmas and New Year party time, Joe pushed the boat out. Oh my goodness me. And as the years went by, his innards became less able to cope with the partying, his kidneys, his liver, his everything. And then it came to one New Year's Eve when Joe was so massively hungover from the preceding Christmas week that he just could not go out at all. In fact, Joe was laid up in bed, still getting over those week's hangovers. And son number one, the vicar, had been worried enough to come and spend New Year's Eve with his dad, give up his own celebrations with his own family and come and sit with his dad all that night. But he wasn't wasting his time. He had his notes with him and he was making ready, drafting the sermons for the coming year. And he sat there as the minutes ticked around the clock, and then down in the hall, the grandfather clock drew breath to strike midnight, that moment between one day and the next, that instant between 1 year and the next. And it was at that moment that the devil appeared, come to claim the boozy old farmer's soul. But you know what? Even the devil modernizes. So that night when the devil turned up, yes, horns, yes, cloven hooves, yes, spiky, tridenty thing, wearing a smart suit, an Yves Saint Laurent suit with the Karl Lagerfeld style of ponytail, very chic. See, the devil had been spending a lot of time in France. The devil loves France. I mean, the way they live with the wine and the food and the mistresses and the boyfriends and the everything. I mean, he'd been helping out with the French racehorse industry for decades, and he'd been having a lot of fun with the French rugby team. And above all, of course, the French love the devil loved to be in Paris with the artists and the people living their lives so very differently, and with the fashion industry. And if you look at even now, if you look at the YouTube videos of fashion coming out of France and much of mainland Europe, you can see the devil's influence all over the place. So yes, the Yves Saint Laurent suit, the Karl Lagerfeld ponytail, and a certain other change, because the devil came across to old Joe's bedside and he looked down and he said, I have come to claim your soul. He'd been spending so much time in France, he'd even acquired the accent. I have come to claim your soul. Vous buvez trop. You drink too much. And the next moment, the eldest son jumped to his feet, papers and pen flying in all directions, and the eldest son, the vicar, made the sign of the cross. The devil recoiled, and the eldest son said, you are not getting anywhere near my poor old dad. I can protect my poor old dad because I am a man of God. I can challenge you to a game of cards and I will beat you any day of the week. And by tradition, we know what that means. I can beat you at cards, so I can demand a wish from you. And the wish I demand is that you will give my poor old dad another year of life. And in that year, I will stop him drinking and you will never have him. so much eloquence so forcefully expressed. The devil was almost speechless. Eh ben, effectivement, beat me at cards, ben oui, yes, I must grant you a wish. Well, you want another year for this old soak? You want to stop him drinking? I think perhaps I should like to see you try. Bon, d'accord. I mean, what is a year in the pattern of eternité? Bon, d'accord, it's a deal. Off went the devil. The new year began. I tell you what, ladies, do you think the devil stopped did the devil stop drinking? No, but more importantly, do you think old Joe stopped drinking? No. And so Joe went on drinking all year, and his family and his friends said, Joe, you got to lay off the sauce. And Joe's old blue eyes twinkled, and he said, well, I can't help it, can I? I mean, when she gets so close to my nose, I tips her up and down she goes. And down they went all year, such that at that second New Year's Eve, poor old Joe was, well, he was in a state again. He'd pushed the boat out, he'd partied, but now that New Year's Eve, he was laid up in bed, and it was as if it's not bad enough for a vet to have to work night duty. Here on his alleged days off for the festive season, he was having to take care of his poor old dad. But there he was in that little farmhouse bedroom, that little farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere in the Cotswold countryside. And he was doing a very good job, monitoring his dad's temperature and his pulse and all the rest of it, sitting there in the little bedroom as the clock ticked around to midnight. And in that moment between one day and the next year, into the bedroom came the devil, and the vet looked up and he looked at old Nick, and he looked again down at the devil's hooves. And the devil was slightly kind of not quite walking straight. And I mean, if there would have been more room, the vet would have had him trot up and down. But as it was, he looked at him and he said, I say, I think you've got galloping mucklehoof. I tell you what, I've got some new jollop for that. What is it? Amoxicillin. Now, if you will grant my poor old dad another year of life, I'll give you 2 tubes of amoxicillin, and that'll see off your trouble in, less than a fortnight. How about it? Do we have a deal? And the devil said, eh ben, well, my feet is hurting me, something chronic, this amoxicillin quelque chose, it can vraiment help me? Oh, yes. Well, what is a year in the pattern of eternité? Bon, d'accord, it's a deal. And the devil took his amoxicillin quelque chose, and off he went. And another year went by, and do you think old Joe stopped drinking? Of course he didn't. But that third New Year's Eve, oh my goodness me. For one thing, it was a dark and stormy night. And the wind howled around that little farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in the Cotswold countryside. And of course, what still happens out here in the Cotswolds, when we have a really good storm, we get a power cut. The power had gone out early in the day. That New Year's Eve, it was the turn of the youngest son, the one who'd gone to London, the one who was the hotshot lawyer. And there he was, standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the lightning across the sky. And in front of him on the windowsill, a little candle, little stub of candle, guttered and flickered and flared on a cracked saucer. And it came to the end of the old year. And the clock ticked around and drew breath to strike midnight. The golden yellow flame flared high and threw monstrous black shadows on the bedroom walls. And at just that moment between the old year and the next, out of the shadows stepped the devil. But that was the year the devil had come under a new fashion influence. He had been captivated by the fashion styling of Vivienne Westwood. So he arrived that night with a red leather basque laced up tight. He had the kind of trousers with bits cut out in places you would not normally expect a man to have bits cut out of his trousers, and other bits laced up tighter. He had high heels on his cloven hooves. He had bangles. He had one beautiful earring. He had eye makeup. He had perfume. He jangled across to the farmer's bedside. He looked down and he said, "Old Joe, I have come to claim your soul, and this time there shall be no piecing about." The lawyer, in his smart London overcoat, he turned from the windowsill. From an inside pocket, he drew out a long brown legal envelope, and he extracted the document and unfolded it and showed it to the devil. "This is a contract that consigns my father's soul to you in perpetuity. No codicils, no messing about. My father has made his mark to sign it. I've signed it as a witness, and I believe all it needs now is for you, sir, to sign it. And then I think we can agree between us as professional gentlemen that, well, my poor old dad probably doesn't need to live any longer than it would take for that candle flame to burn out." The devil is no fool. The devil came forward and crouched down low and inspected the candle closely. "Eh ben, there is not much left. It is presque épuisé. It is almost exhausted. Bon, it will not last much longer. Bon, d'accord, it's a deal." And the moment that the devil spoke those words, the lawyer leaned forward, reached out, and pinched out the candle flame. And the devil let out a hiss of fury, because, of course, he'd been tricked. He'd been defeated. He had to go away without the old farmer's soul, because that candle flame would never, ever burn out by itself. And that is why, to this very day, contrary to all expectation, that is why these days the devil hates lawyers.